afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our conversation today about how philanthropy can advance environmental justice. We're thrilled to have you here. I'm Bianca Durrani, President and CEO of Role Philanthropy, which is a fundraising consulting firm created by a group of fundraisers that wanted to make fundraising simpler, smarter, and more successful for the organizations that we care about. We support organizations nationwide with strategic advisory, capacity building projects, and embedded support. As a firm created to drive change, we are thrilled to be hosting this event series with NYU. In the recent months, we have talked about conversations or had conversations about how philanthropy can strengthen our democracy and advance health equity. And in our next session on May 5th, we will be continuing the conversation about economic equality. But today, our group of thought leaders is going to talk about the role of philanthropy in driving change and solving complex challenges related to environmental justice. And we're really thrilled to be having this conversation. I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle D'Amico from NYU to introduce the program and our moderator for today.
Great, thanks so much, Bianca. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs here at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Since its founding, our goal at CGA has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through a variety of activities, including our 2 graduate programs, one in global affairs and another MS in global security, conflict, and cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as this that expand upon the critical and timely topics covered in our classrooms. We are very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Through our open enrollment courses and certificates in fundraising and new certificate in digital fundraising program, we offer professionally oriented educational options for those looking to enter or grow the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast experience, expertise, and networks to the classroom. We'll send out a follow-up message to all attendees, so please feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. Additionally, we've reserved some time at the end of today's conversations for questions from the audience. Please feel free to submit these via the Q&A tool. And now I'd like to introduce my wonderful colleague, Dr. Carolyn Kassan, who will moderate today's conversation. Dr. Carolyn Kassan serves as academic director here at the CGA and is a clinical professor and coordinator of the Energy and Environment concentration. She teaches graduate level courses examining the geopolitics of energy, comparative energy politics, energy, environment and resource security, and climate change and security. During her time at NYU, Dr. Kassan has been awarded numerous well-deserved teaching awards. She's a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a member of the National Committee on US-China Relations, and serves on the boards of New York Energy Forum and New York Energy Week. She is also the director of the SPS Energy, Climate Justice, and Sustainability Lab. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to you, Carolyn. The virtual floor is all yours.
Well, Michelle, thank you so very much for that very generous introduction. I am really deeply grateful to have the opportunity to be here to moderate this panel with a really just exquisite group of environmental justice leaders. And today we're here to talk about a very timely topic, how philanthropy can advance environmental justice. Today's panel will explore what role can each of us play in driving change. We'll explore how philanthropic individuals, foundations, and companies are approaching this reimagining of environmental justice and how they should be. And here's just a couple of numbers also to think about. Americans give billions of dollars to environmental causes, about 14 billion last year. Only about 3% of the overall donations, however, goes to environmental causes. How can we increase giving to these causes? How can donors achieve greater impact through their investments? In consideration of the nonprofit leaders and fundraisers in our audience, we'll also touch on how you can engage a diverse and dynamic base of philanthropists in your work in this area. And so to begin, it is my great pleasure to introduce this distinguished panel. Jamaica Adams is Senior Vice President of Diversity and Justice at the Climate Reality Project. She previously served as the Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Tom Steyer Political Action Committee. Prior to her DEI work, Jamaica held digital communication and campaign leadership roles at MoveOn.org, Next Gen America, the Democratic National Committee, and the NAACP. Liliana Alala is Climate Justice Director for the City of Seattle at the Office of Sustainability and Environment. Previously, she led climate, energy, and natural resources policy and outreach for Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Liliana is a longtime advocate for equitable access to open space and is part of a People of Color-led collective working to develop a community land conservancy in Seattle. Melissa Miles is Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. She's an advocate who began her career in the field as a grassroots activist and community organizer in Newark, New Jersey. She is also a member of advisory and steering bodies for the Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the Coalition for Healthy Ports, the Moving Forward Network, and the Climate Justice Alliance Black Caucus. And Peggy Shepard. Peggy is co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice. Peggy has been named co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and was the first female chair of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She also serves on the executive committee of the National Black Environmental Justice Network and the board of advisors of the Columbia Mailman School of Public Health. We are grateful to have all four of these fantastic panelists joining us today for this conversation. So to begin, we're going to do a quick round robin. And so this is a question for Jamaica, Liliana, Melissa, and Peggy. To get started, I like to ground our conversation in the unique perspectives you each bring. Can you tell us about how you see the role for yourself in your organization in the fight for environmental justice? And Jamaica, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Jamaica Adams, and I first and foremost want to thank the event host, Superior Philanthropy and NYU, and appreciate the opportunity to share space with my esteemed panelists. I came to this work in DEI via advocacy in the political space, working with constituencies and messaging via the former President Barack Obama's policies as it related to constituencies, bringing that information directly to those different communities, and via work at the NAACP that centered civil and human rights. That work was always undergirded with racial equity. And currently, I'm serving as a senior VP at the Climate Reality Project, where we understand that there is no climate and environmental justice without racial justice, without racial equity. And centering that piece, that equity piece within our conversation is key to all of the work that we do.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll go on to Liliana.
Yes, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So glad to be here with these amazing people on this panel. Thank you. I'll share I see my role in the fight for environmental justice as that of an organizer, of a network weaver, somebody that seeks to deeply understand what people's gifts and passions are, and what I call it their superpowers, so that I can help facilitate a connection to strengthen the collective movement change that I'm engaged in through my role at the City of Seattle. There, I'm the Climate Justice Director, and in that role, I'm working with some incredible people across communities, organizations, departments, government agencies, to make changes that help dismantle systemic and institutional racism while redressing past harms and inequities, specifically as it connects to the root causes and impacts of climate change and environmental justice. I oversee a team of brilliant people who are leading programs and policy through an environmental justice grant program, who staff community oversight boards, and who are working together to develop a vision of what a Green New Deal for Seattle could look like. And I'll just briefly share that my perspective is anchored in that of my family, who has raised me to be deeply connected with a sense of place and nature and earth. And my career really started as a worker doing trail work and habitat restoration and ecology. And so I share that because that really colors my own lens in terms of how I look at the solutions and the problems and what is possible with an ecosystems-based approach. And that absolutely includes people.
It's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you. I think all four panelists have such extraordinary superpowers. So I'm glad that our audience gets a chance to learn about all of these superpowers. Melissa, over to you, please. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, all. Melissa Miles. I am the ED of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. Thank you all for having me here today. My personal story is that I did not have any background in environmental work before I moved to and became active in an environmental justice community, which is where I got my start. I was probably the target, or I was the target of many organizers who just started inviting me out to events. It was neighborhood mapping here and truck counting there and testifying to the EPA on the cleanup of the Passaic River and other types of things like that I could do along with my young children. And it really wasn't until my own family was really impacted by environmental pollution that the spark was lit. So I'm here really kind of representing that community member who, was able to make eventually a tangible change in my life through environmental justice organizing. And that's my goal for all communities that we work with. As I mentioned, I'm the ED of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. And in addition to being New Jersey's only statewide environmental organization that is focused specifically on environmental justice communities, and New Jersey's only statewide organization whose leadership, board, and membership are comprised primarily of people of color, we have a pretty big mission. In addition to that, we are active on a national front, playing leadership roles in the Equitable and Just Climate Platform, the Building Equity and Alliance for Environmental Justice, more recently as an organization in the Climate Justice Alliance, which is the organization that invited and extended this opportunity to me today. And so, we belong not only to communities and to our state, but to the nation. And, that's a lot of accountability. And so, one of the things that I really hope to uplift today is just how much support, folks on the front line need to be able to, extend ourselves in this way for the sake of communities and planet.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. We're definitely going to return to many of those very key ideas that you raised. Peggy, over to you.
Yeah, well, I got involved in West Harlem because of community struggles around facilities that were polluting the air. A couple of years later, I was part of developing the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice at the first National People of Color Leadership Summit, and the mandate was to go home and build a base. And so that is what we have done. We have worked to build a base with the most affected African-American and Latino residents in uptown neighborhoods in Manhattan. And we have worked to build movement. So we've always had both of those objectives. We built movement through developing the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum that builds capacity and links groups to funding. We are strong advocates within the philanthropy for developing new funding mechanisms. One we've just developed is the fund to build community power through the JPB Foundation. and we work to advance environmental justice at the city, state, and federal level. New York has had I've been active in developing the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee at the state level. I chair the New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and I'm working at the federal level, co-chairing the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So really working to advance environmental justice at a local, state, and national level.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just so in awe of all the work that the four of you are doing. Really just tremendous. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of look at the kind of a big level and then go down to more of the local level. So to get a big picture view, I'm gonna start with you, Liliana. What do you think donors need to know about what environmental justice is or how it is defined?
Thank you, Carolyn. A fact that guides me in my work is that in the United States, race is the #1 indicator of whether a person lives next to polluted air, water, or soil. And that is what anchors me in my work. And I think it's an important thing in anchoring those in the philanthropic community as well. If we know that, we know that environmental injustice and climate change persist and consistently impact particular communities, then I think that tells us where we need to be putting our resources and building stronger partnerships. So the reason for that, I think back to racism, racist policies such as redlining, which dictated where investments were made, where people of color could live based on skin color. And so for me and many others, environmental justice isn't solely about the end product. It is also about who is centered in the development of the solutions and the decisions that are made. It is about who is leading that work. It is also about the process in which those ideas are elevated and refined to inform the development of policies, programs, and budgets as well. Developing measures of evaluation to track those things need to be developed with the organizations and the people that are being funded. Investments also need to be made in those organizations to track the measures of success, to track the data, and to tell the story. Oftentimes, organizations are working on shoestring budgets with limited staff. Folks are wearing multiple hats, what that means is that we need to be deeply investing in the people and the capacity of our communities. Our community-based organizations are leading in many ways a new vision for interacting with ourselves and each other and with the earth. And I'm seeing organizations shifting their work weeks from 40 hours to something more manageable to take care of their people. So it's not just about moving from extractive way of being in terms of energy. It's about investing in regeneration of ourselves and each other in the spirit of a new vision for how society can be and how we can live. So I think that just a couple things in there, but the measures of success for working towards environmental justice really shift depending on the organization, the communities, and the work being done. To increase tree canopy cover for communities and neighborhoods that are impacted by urban heat island effect and air pollution are going to have different measures of success than an organization leading intergenerational work with youth and elders to purchase land, to farm and grow culturally relevant foods. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that a static set of measures of evaluation and assessment are not going to work in tracking success for environmental justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to move over to you, Jamaica. And this is especially, I think, relevant in light of the most recent publication of the third working group, the IPCC report, right, that really reminds us of how much work we need to do and how little time we have to do that work. So the scale and complexity of climate and environmental related issues can be overwhelming. And donors often share difficulty knowing where to start. Can you help us understand the major challenges to environmental justice globally?
Sure. I think, when I hear that question, I think about storytelling and when seeking that information of reaching out to those communities, to those countries that are impacted by environmental injustice is a key part of it. We at the Climate Reality Project are talking to and working with our 11 international branches to make sure that we are representing those communities, indigenous communities, communities that are most impacted by environmental injustice in this conversation, and centering those needs, centering those issues within that framework. Oftentimes when we look at this work and who can do this work, there is a class element, there is a privilege element to it. And so looking around who is not in the conversation when we're speaking about these issues is a key part of it. And when we're looking at donors, and their donors asking where to start, I think looking at different donor bases that really ground their work within equity, really have that spectrum of that global perspective, and also seeking input from those different communities, using participatory funding models, using those models where peers are actually letting folks know what work is being done in the communities, both domestically and internationally, and letting them lead that work, letting those communities fund that work and lead that, not fund that work, but lead that work and tell the funders where that work is needed. That is a key part of it. And looking at the different data sets that we are judging where the needs are, and making sure that those are not we're disrupting the systems of oppression. We're not using white supremacist models of judging what is successful in determining where the need is. So I think that's the combination of pieces that will help donors determine where their funds are needed, and also, looking to a different model of the philanthropic community that, includes those voices of the most impacted, both internationally and domestically.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. And it just as a quick follow-up, is that in terms of are donors understanding like the new ideas and the solutions that are emerging? Like how can we better make donors informed of the solutions that are out there?
Most definitely. I have seen articles within the Chronicle Philanthropy and other different spaces that speak about participatory funding and how that model is a more equitable model of determining where funds are needed, and also understanding the equity piece, in the sense that when we're asking folks who are impacted by those communities to determine where funding is needed, we have to make sure that that time is compensated, that they are, respected as subject matter experts in that regard. But I also think the movement of bringing together donors of color and donors who are impacted with that, with those issues is a big key part of it. So the Donor Colors Network is a big piece of that, and other types of movements like that really kind of disrupt that model, and the funding tables look a little bit different. I think those type of advisory committees are helpful as well.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to kind of move to a more local view, and Melissa, this question is for you. What are the challenges to environmental justice at the local level?
Thanks, Dr. Kissane. That is a really simple and very complex question that, we could talk about in terms of, social, economic, racial, health, environmental aspects of that. But, what I think I might focus on is policy. So for us in New Jersey, we look a lot at cumulative impacts of pollution, which is a concept that's been around in environmental justice for quite some time. But, the fact that communities had to fight facilities one at a time, and, our Department of Environmental Protection could not take into account the fact that a community already had several polluting facilities when citing another one. And that also goes back to, the racist roots of planning and zoning, and why is it that people of color are all living together on the least desirable land, right? So this is historical. But, cumulative impacts, New Jersey now has an environmental justice law that addresses cumulative impacts that folks, in EJ, in the state, and allies worked on for many, many years. And, I think it's really important when we talk about a funding perspective to understand that the EJ law in New Jersey took over a decade to come to, realization. And that in that time, EJ advocates never stopped waving that flag. When it wasn't popular with environmental groups, when the government was telling us they didn't have the power to do it or the science to do it, we kept scouring the country for experts to help us, make the case. And then at the exact right moment, which just so happened to be around the time that the Black Lives Matter movement gained massive traction in this country, when everyone started to see that when Black people said, I can't breathe, it wasn't only due to, police brutality, but also due to the amount of PM 2.5 in Black communities. When that started to become clear, then our law started to move. And it started to move because we never stopped pushing. So how do you fund a campaign that lasts 11 years? How do you even talk about work when we know that victories are not easy in environmental justice, and they're not fast? And I'm sure, Peggy can talk to this as well, because so much of, the work that we do in New Jersey, was also, informed by the work that happened in New York and still does. And it's like some of these campaigns last decades. My children won't swim in the Passaic River, even though I testified about it and we had the largest, settlement, Superfund settlement to date. We won't see the results of that for generations. So how can funders start to think generationally when they fund campaigns? And, adding to what Liliana and Jamia put forward, it really looks like trust, which is something that, the Climate Justice Alliance talks about a lot, is how do we trust the groups that are doing the work on the front lines and fund those groups accordingly, not with the same type of deliverables and standards as you do groups that are not working with human beings, or groups that have campaigns that can be wrapped up in 6 months or a year. Our campaigns are about, securing lives, not just now, but well into the future. So, how do we, see that type of paradigm shift across philanthropy that accounts for the fact that EJ work is done at a different time frame, but that we know we need to kick it up. We know time is limited. We know what we're up against in terms of, community, health, economics, and unfortunately, the number of false solutions that are coming to the forefront as the country races to decrease its carbon footprint. We're up against all of that, and what kind of support we actually need to win those battles in a timely way would be probably about 10 or even 100 times more support than we're currently getting. So, yeah.
Thank you. It was very powerful. And I just also appreciate your perseverance and not giving up, right? For your community, for your children, and for beyond. So this is a good segue for over to Peggy. Peggy, what do you think donors need to know about ideas and solutions that are emerging at the local level?
I think environmental donors are very plugged into certain policies. And so they're often looking for groups that are working on those issues. Otherwise, I don't think that they really are, kind of have their head to the ground in what's going on. They're really looking at what they are interested in and who's doing that. And so groups reach out and say, well, who's doing electrification work? Who's doing medium and heavy duty truck work? So a lot of big donors are really very focused on their particular kind of issue. I think what they don't understand and are beginning to understand is that the most effective policies happen when there has been a base built that supports those policies. And they're realizing that because they're losing again at the federal level. After millions have been pumped in, we do not have the climate policy through Build Back Better that everyone was anticipating. This is almost like going back 10 years ago with the McCain-Lieberman bill or Waxman-Markey that failed. And so again, we're finding that without that base supporting, talking to the elected officials, educating them to support this, that we're not winning. The environmental community is not winning, and the environmental justice community is not winning without that kind of support. So understanding the base building that's necessary. You know, green groups have all these members. They can't pull them out for anything. They can't pull them out for anything. So again, how do we build that base? How do you support it? Because when we were first getting started, to say the word organizing, no foundation wanted to hear the word organizing. So we began to do the policy work and tack on organizers to all the policy work in order to subsidize that. But communities have solutions if they are engaged in environmental decision-making. And part of the environmental racism has been to keep those people out of decision-making. But when we can engage them, when we can train community folks to go and testify at the city council hearing, to speak, tell their own story at the rally, not hear, you know, what professional advocates are saying, but what they are really feeling on the ground, that is what really makes a difference. But again, most small grassroots groups are going to be funded primarily by foundations. It takes a lot of work to get to donors. It takes a lot of work to get to individual donors. It takes cultivation. It takes a development department of a couple of staff. And it takes cultivating donors. Anybody who gives us over, it used to be over $200, I had a meeting with them to understand their interests so that they understood us and to move them along to a bigger donation. And, you know, it's really important for, I think, for grassroots organizations to understand how to create the visibility that will get a donor to see them. And there are many ways to do that. You know, one way that I think is really important is volunteering. You know, in the early days, I said yes to every advisory group I was asked to join, even though it takes a lot of work. Speaking everywhere I was asked to speak to gain that visibility because we didn't have the communications to gain that visibility. And so I think that there are ways that we really need to think about providing a coach for some organizations. I had a volunteer, someone who volunteered from a major group and worked with me every week to help develop our donor development unit. And it made such a difference to have that kind of coach. Often we're very isolated in our communities and we don't have anyone else to talk to. I don't have a lot of other people to talk to about being an executive director at an organization like this one. And so again, those networks that we have developed become so important for that work.
Thank you. Thank you. I will have so many follow-up questions, but I know we have other questions we want to make sure that we get through. So I'll be following up with all of you after this panel. So just speaking on the role of philanthropy, this question is for you, Liliana. The environmental justice movement is global and diverse. What can you tell us about the ecosystem of institutions, organizations, and individuals who are leading it?
Thank you. One, I'll say indigenous people and tribes worldwide have been leading this work since time immemorial. And that continues to be true. And also, just another reason for deep investment in the voices and communities and leadership of Indigenous folks, Black communities who have been leading this work. So that's who I'm seeing. And I'll making a special point in saying women and girls are leading this work. That investment in the leadership of women and girls is so important and so critical when it comes to not just environmental issues, but social issues across the board. So I'm seeing, those folks. I also think it's interesting for me as somebody who's new to government. I think in the past 5 years or so, I see grassroots organizations, community members as the ones that are leading this work, and different governments and more resourced organizations and institutions, educational institutions and universities are absolutely asking the critical questions of themselves around the privilege and responsibility that we hold in following the lead of our community members, and really thinking critically about how we shift the systems and infrastructure around shared power, decision-making models, reimagining the way that we infuse resources and funds into our community, and doing that in partnership as best we can. Now, it's imperfect, right? We're humans, and perfection is actually the antithesis of what we're trying to seek. And I think, I'm just inspired by what Peggy and Melissa have shared around the work being generational. And I remember being a young person, seeing the principles of environmental justice, and being inspired by that. And sorry, I'm feeling emotional. Being in a space where I hold responsibility for living out those principles and building on them. So I think, just in terms of the ecosystem and the landscape of institutions, young folks are now in leadership positions and responsible for moving the institutions that we're working in towards better partnerships and better systems and infrastructure. So I think, just a point there around youth and young people and the importance of investing in the leadership and voice and development of those young people so that they're well equipped and part of a connected network of support to continue to build the base and build grassroots movements together. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jamaica, what kind of support do nonprofits in the ecosystem of environmental justice need from donors, whether it's institutional funders, major philanthropists, or everyday donors?
Sure. I'll speak from the perspective of the Climate Reality Project, which is, of course, a training organization that's founded by former Vice President Al Gore. And what we're doing is really trying to educate folks about the climate crisis and include that within that the environmental justice work that needs to be done. And so I would say that folks within the green ecosystem that I occupy, which oftentimes is predominantly white, predominantly affluent, and may not always include that environmental justice aspect, is to bring in those voices and to make sure that when talking to donors, that those considerations about environmental justice support is there. I think that the consideration also should be around intersectional support of environmental justice and climate justice projects. It's time that we ground this work with an intersectional lens so that donors should consider giving money to projects and organizations that are working in partnerships with other intersectional issues. Environmental justice bleeds into health, immigration, women's issues, civil and human rights, and criminal justice. And at this point, when we're at this crisis time within this fight, we should be looking to blend those different issues together to build that work and to make our movement that much stronger. So I would encourage the traditional Greens to look to environmental justice partners and to consider those intersectional partners as well, folks who are working within those different spaces that I spoke about, and to really widen the movement, because when we build those connections together, it makes it a stronger project to consider. And I think for donors and whatnot, when they're looking at projects, they should also consider capacity funding. Oftentimes, funds are directed toward a specific environmental justice project, but looking at capacity, because oftentimes environmental justice organizations, because of systemic oppression, because of economic injustice, do not have the resources that some of the traditional Greens have. And so looking at capacity support when considering donating is a really key part of building equity into this space.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very rich answer. So I want to move to both Melissa and Peggy and kind of follow up to what Jamaica just shared. And both of you have also sort of raised this in your earlier responses, but what are the barriers that nonprofits like yours face in securing the support you need? Melissa, maybe you want to go first, and then we'll hand it over to Peggy. And then also, I want to thank the audience for the questions that are coming in. We'll start to ask those questions after this round.
Sure. Thank you. So, I don't think I'll talk about barriers as much as the learning that can happen and that I see is happening at times. So for one, we kind of started off the conversation with talking about the billions that exist in philanthropy, for giving and then for environmental. So I think one of the pieces of learning is how philanthropic organizations can work together when they see a group, that they are funding. I have some funders that will bring me to the table to talk to other funders that will introduce us to funders. Because when we talk about things like funding capacity, that's a long-term game, right? And I'm sure anyone who's been an ED can speak to this. And a not-for-profit, you don't want to have to lay off a staff member because a grant period ended, right? As ED, it's our responsibility to take care of our folks, which brings me to point number 2, staff-run programs. So we need to take care of our people. We have to be cognizant that there is this perception that activism, organizing, not-for-profit work should leave people broke and broken. And I've seen it happen. Some of in our environmental justice movement, things that should not have happened to people. People give their whole lives to something, and then at the end, don't really have the tangible benefits to show for it. And so, my passion is that doesn't happen anymore in our movement, and will never happen to my staff under my leadership, right? So in terms of how we pay, our benefits, our retirement, our professional development, people should walk away from our organizations even in an even better position to, work in this climate and environmental justice movement. And, again, that takes support, and it's not always seen as a viable area of support, right? But we have to say, like, people need, they need to feel this is difficult work, and it requires a lot of people, and it's work that you take home. It's work that you wake up in the morning with. So, we need to compensate people and take care of our staff. And so, and then also that, philanthropy looks at our work as an investment, right? It's not a handout. Like, what we're doing, we understand that when we address issues in environmental justice communities, everyone benefits. That's the beauty of it, right? The whole city gets better, the nation gets better, the world gets better. So this is an investment in the future, in everyone's future. So, we want to also see, these investments over long periods of time, for the long term, and deep investment. That, again, that philanthropy is willing to learn from itself. So there are a lot of really great practices out there. I don't want to name anyone, but, I have funders who, it's really about a conversation. What do you need? What can we do? Who are very conscientious that in their philanthropic practice, that they don't extract from us. And we've heard that word in this conversation, extraction, normally used, to convey the idea that in this economy, right, this economy kind of functions on the extraction of health from communities, right, of bodies from communities, of fossil fuels from the earth. But there's many different forms of extraction, of personal extraction. And so, there are funders who are very conscientious about what they're asking, and others not so much, others who just aren't at that place yet where they're asking themselves, what are we asking for this funding? What are we asking for once they get it? How much time will they take it? Is this the